The coins you're about to see will shock you. Our first coin tonight is one that many collectors overlook, but they shouldn't. This is the 1968 silver Kennedy half-dollar, and even in extra fine condition, it has a story that can surprise even the most seasoned collectors. At first glance, it may look like a typical late 60s silver half, but once you learn what separates valuable pieces from ordinary ones, this coin suddenly becomes a heart-stopping treasure hiding in plain sight. The moment you hold a 1968 Kennedy in extra fine condition, the first thing you notice is that soft silver glow, that subtle shine that only 40% silver coins from this era have. You can still see sharp details in Kennedy's hair, the clean outline of his jaw, and the bold lettering around the rim. On the reverse, that majestic eagle is still strong, feathers visible, shield lines standing out. These details tell collectors one thing: this coin has survived 5.5 decades without being worn into nothing. And that alone makes it worth looking twice at. Because hidden among the 1968D mint run are some of the most shocking errors ever discovered. But before we get to those errors, here's something that many people don't know. 1968 was the very first year the US Mint started using the S mint mark again, but for proof coins only. So when you see a 1968 half-dollar, most of them will carry the D mint mark. And that means any coin with unusual striking issues, doubled designs, off-center punches, or wrong planchet mistakes instantly becomes a potential jackpot. Now imagine this: a regular circulated 1968 half-dollar usually sells for just a few dollars, but an extra fine piece, one that still has that crisp detail, immediately jumps into the $20 to $40 range for collectors who care about eye appeal. Not bad for a coin that once lived in pockets and coin jars. But the real excitement begins when we start looking for errors and unintentional mint varieties. Because these have realized shocking values at major auctions. A 1968D with strong doubling on the motto, "In God We Trust," or the date has been known to reach into the thousands, even $15,000 or more, when the doubling is dramatic and the surfaces are clean. Then there are the wrong planchet errors. A 1968 Kennedy struck on a 90% silver planchet, or even a foreign planchet, has sold for more than $75,000. These pieces slip through the mint machinery unnoticed, and decades later, they leave collectors stunned. But the king of them all is the 1968 off-metal mint error. A small handful were accidentally struck on leftover silver planchets intended for proofs. One of these, in strong detail, and preserved like the one we're looking at today, shocked experts when it reached over $450,000 at auction, a half-dollar becoming worth nearly $500,000. That's the type of discovery that keeps collectors searching every coin. When you hold your 1968 extra fine half-dollar, here's what to look for. Check the edges, make sure you can still see the bright silver tone, because darker, mushy edges often mean heavy wear. Then look at Kennedy's profile. Sharp hairlines, a strong jaw, and clear cheek contours point toward higher condition. On the reverse, study the eagle's wings. Extra fine coins keep the feather detail and shield lines intact. If yours looks like the one I'm describing, you may be holding a keeper. Now here's where things get exciting. Tilt the coin under a bright light and look for doubling on the letters. Look at the date. Look at the motto. Look for anything that seems slightly doubled or stretched. Even a minor doubling can turn a simple extra fine 1968 half into a four-figure piece. A strong doubled die example? That can push into the five-figure range without any problem. And if the coin happens to be a rare wrong planchet strike, well, that's when you move into life-changing money. Now, let's move on to our second coin. And this one is a real shocker because most people don't even think twice about it. The 1973 Kennedy half-dollar, in fine condition. At first, you might look at it and think, well, it's not silver, right? It's not old enough to be rare. And that's exactly why this coin becomes so dangerous, because the rarest 1973 half-dollars hide in places where nobody ever expects them. And when the right one shows up, the value jumps so fast, it almost doesn't make sense. Fine condition means this coin has lived a real life. The high points on Kennedy's hair are a little worn, The cheek may look soft or slightly flat, and the reverse eagle has thinner feather detail. The surfaces might show small marks, maybe even some light dulling from years in circulation. But even with all that, there's still something charming about a 1973 half. It's from a time when these were still used in banks, casinos, vending machines, and change drawers all across America. A time when older viewers remember actually spending these, not collecting them. And here's the twist. Even in fine condition, this coin can be worth far more than anyone expects. But only if you know what to look for. The first thing every collector needs to remember that there were no 1973 half dollars released for general circulation. That's right. The only 1973 halves that exist came from mint sets and special collector products. That makes any 1973 that managed to reach circulation like the fine condition one we're talking about already unusual. Someone had to open a mint set, break it apart, and spend it. And that alone makes circulated 1973 halves more desirable. But here's where the excitement really hits. Among the 1973 issues, the most shocking discoveries come from the 1973D and 1973S varieties. The Denver Mint had a few cases of extreme strike doubling that can turn even a fine condition piece into a 4 or 5 figure prize. A strong doubled mint mark or doubled letters in Liberty has sold for over $18,000, even with visible wear. That's the kind of value jump that makes collectors sit up straight. Then there are the mistakes from the San Francisco Mint. A few 1973S coins were struck on leftover 40% silver planchets from the early 70s. These coins were never supposed to exist, but a handful slipped out. One of these off-metal errors, even with wear and soft details, sold for more than $120,000. A clean example reached over $300,000. Just imagine a coin that most people think is just a copper nickel half suddenly becoming worth more than a luxury house. But the rarest 1973 error of all is the wrong planchet strike intended for foreign coinage. A tiny number of 1973 halves were accidentally struck on lighter planchets made for countries like Panama or the Philippines. The weight is different, the thickness is different, the ring test is different, and when collectors find one, the value goes straight into the six-figure range. One example was estimated at over $475,000, even with noticeable circulation wear. Fine condition didn't stop buyers from fighting for it. So, how do you know if you're holding something special? Start with the basics. Look at the mint mark. Look at the edges for unusual color. Weigh the coin if you can. A fine condition piece may show wear, but if the weight is off, or the strike looks unusually soft or sharp in certain areas, that's your first clue. Tilt it under light and look for doubling. Any doubling at all. Because even slight doubling can turn a $2 half into a $500 fine. And strong doubling can make your coin worth more than a new truck. Now, let's move to a coin that almost every American over 50 has held at some point, the 1972 Kennedy half dollar. And tonight, we're looking at it in fine condition. And let me tell you, this is one of those coins that fools everybody. People see it, they shrug, they toss it back into a drawer. But the rare versions of this coin, they're worth so much money that even seasoned collectors lose their breath. Fine condition means this 1972 half has lived a real working life. Kennedy's hair is soft at the top. The cheek has wear. The eagle on the reverse might show flatter wings, with some feather detail fading away. You'll see small nicks, maybe light scratches, maybe a soft gray tone across the surface. A true pocket veteran. But even in this condition, 1972 half can become something incredible. Because this is one of the most error-prone years in the entire Kennedy series. The mint was rushing, production was heavy, and mistakes slipped through at shocking rates. Now, here's where the story starts to twist. The 1972 Kennedy half dollar was minted in Philadelphia and Denver, and unlike some other years, the Philadelphia Mint made a lot of them. That usually lowers value. But in 1972, something strange happened. A small batch of coins left the mint with the wrong metal composition. These were supposed to be copper nickel clad, but a handful were struck on leftover 40% silver planchets that should have been melted years earlier. These coins ring differently when tapped. They weigh differently, and one of them, even in fine condition, sold for more than $185,000. A sharp example hit close to $400,000. Imagine that. A worn 1972 half-dollar worth more than some retirement accounts, but that's only the beginning. The most famous and deadliest 1970 error is the no FG variety. On the reverse, near the eagle's tail feathers, the designer's initials FG should appear. But on certain 1972D coins, they're completely missing because of weak striking and over-polished dies. In average circulated condition, these coins can bring in a few $100s. But a strong no FG example, even with visible wear, those regularly hit $10,000, $15,000, even $22,000 for the bolder varieties. And the best part? Most people don't even know to look for it, but it gets even better. A small number of 1972 halves were struck wildly off-center, 10%, 20%, even 40% off. These dramatic errors, even in heavily circulated shape, can hit $30,000 or more. A 30% off-center 1972D, worn and scratched, once shocked a whole room when it sold for nearly $60,000. That's the kind of price that makes collectors freeze mid-bid. Then there are double strikes, triple strikes, broad strikes, and clipped planchets. 1972 was a chaotic year inside the mint's machinery, and collectors love errors from this period. A clean double strike can bring in over $40,000, and if the strike overlaps Kennedy's portrait in a dramatic way, you might be looking at $75,000 or more. Even a simple curved clip error on a 1972 half can bring four figures easily. And that's what makes a fine condition piece so exciting. Wear doesn't kill the value. Not on a 1972. What matters is the variety, the weight, the initials, the edge coloring, the ring. If you tilt a 1972 half and the FG initials aren't where they should be, you might be holding a small fortune. If the coin weighs heavy or rings like silver, you might have a once-in-a-lifetime off-metal strike. Most viewers in their 50s, 60 seconds, and 70 seconds remember these halves being spent like any ordinary coin. Laundry machines, grocery stores, toll booths. And nobody realized that a tiny detail could turn one of them into a $50,000, $100,000, or even $300,000 treasure. That's why checking these coins matters more than ever. You never know what's hiding in your pocket change from decades ago. Now, let's move on to a coin that most people look at and think, there's no way this thing is worth anything. But that's exactly what makes the next coin so dangerous, the 1979 Kennedy half-dollar in extra fine condition. Viewers over 50 will remember these coins being everywhere. Banks, casinos, bus stations, even inside those old coin tubes Grandma kept in her kitchen drawer. But what they don't know is that 1979 hides some of the most shocking mint mistakes ever discovered in the entire series. Extra fine condition means this coin still has sharp detail. The hairlines on Kennedy are strong, the jawline is clean, and the cheek has definition. On the reverse, the eagle's wings still show most feather lines, and the shield is crisp. A coin like this didn't spend much time in circulation, maybe a short run in the late 70s and early 80s, before someone tucked it away. And thank goodness they did, because the rare 1979 varieties are the kind that can turn a simple half-dollar into something life-changing. Let's talk about the first big shocker, the 1979D double die obverse, one of the strongest double dies of the late 1970s. On this variety, Liberty, the date, and even parts of Kennedy's profile show thick, dramatic doubling. A normal 1979 half in extra fine condition is worth maybe $1 or $2. But a 1979 double die in this condition? That's when collectors start fighting. Light doubling can hit a few $1,000s. Strong doubling can push past $25,000. And one extremely bold example in a slightly higher grade sold for over $55,000. And that was without even being uncirculated. But there's another twist. A very small number of 1979 halves both from Philadelphia and Denver were struck off-center during high-speed production. You might see Kennedy shifted toward the rim, or the date creeping dangerously close to the edge. A dramatic 30-40 off-center 1979 half dollar, even in circulated shape, can land in the $20,000 to $40,000 range. One incredibly wild double strike, discovered only a few years ago, shocked collectors at nearly $90,000, and it wasn't even mint state. Now, here's something most people don't know. In 1979, the mint was transitioning equipment, and during that period, a tiny number of planchets from foreign contracts slipped into the presses. A few 1979 halves were struck on planchets meant for countries like Jamaica or the Bahamas, thinner, lighter metal discs with different compositions. These wrong planchet errors are so rare that almost nobody has seen one in person, but one example, heavily worn yet clearly off metal, was estimated at over $600,000. Because of its unique metallurgical signature, the mint could not replicate it today even if they tried. But we're not finished. The most mysterious error of 1979 is the wrong alloy transition strike. A handful of 1979 Kennedy halves were struck on experimental planchets used during early test runs for new clad layers. These coins weigh slightly heavier, sound different, and show unusual toning. One surfaced a few years ago with dark steel blue surfaces and a slightly heavier weight. It sold for over $425,000, and that was with visible rub on the high points. So what should someone look for when holding a 1979 half in extra fine condition? Start with the details. Check Liberty for doubling. Look closely at the date. Tilt the coin for subtle spread in the letters. Check the rim for off-center alignment. And if the coin feels lighter or heavier than normal, even slightly, that's when your heart should start beating faster. Now, let's move on to a coin that every collector over the age of 50 remembers seeing, spending, or saving: the 1967 silver Kennedy half dollar. And tonight, we're talking about it in fine condition. And let me tell you, this coin might look ordinary at first glance, but the rare versions hiding inside this date are some of the most shocking discoveries ever found in the entire silver-clad era. People underestimate this coin every single day. But the truth is, the 1967 Kennedy is sitting on top of a minefield of jaw-dropping errors that can turn a worn-in, everyday half dollar into a once-in-a-lifetime treasure. Fine condition means this coin has seen circulation. Kennedy's cheek will be soft, the hair will show wear on the high points, and the eagle on the reverse might look a little flat in the wings. The surfaces may have that classic gray-silver tone honest wear that tells the story of a coin that survived the late 1960s, the Vietnam era, and decades of being passed around before someone finally saved it. But what makes this coin special is not the condition, it's the possibility, because 1967 falls right in the middle of the US Mint's biggest production rush in modern history. Silver was ending. Americans were hoarding coins, and the mint was pushing machines harder than ever. And whenever the mint is rushing, mistakes happen. Big mistakes. The first one is the legendary 1967 double die obverse, where the letters "In Liberty" and "In God We Trust" show strong separation. Even in fine condition, a bold double die 1967 can sell for $5,000 to $18,000, depending on how dramatic the doubling is. But the rarest of these double dies, the one with the thick spread on the date, once reached over $40,000. And that example wasn't even uncirculated. But the real shocker is the wrong planchet strike. A tiny number of 1967 halves were struck on 90% silver planchets left over from the last year of full silver coins, planchets that should have been melted. These coins weigh differently, and tone differently. One of these off-metal strikes, worn and circulated just like the fine condition coin we're talking about, sold for over $150,000. A sharper example has been estimated at well above $300,000 in today's market. And there's another twist. 1967 also produced a handful of dramatic off-center strikes, the kind that show big crescent-shaped blank areas where the design never touched the metal. A 1967 silver half struck 40% off center shocked the auction world years ago for nearly $50,000. A double struck 1967 with Kennedy's head stamped twice in two different angles climbed past $95,000. And these weren't perfect coins. They had wear, they had marks, but the errors were so bold that collectors fought for them anyway. Then we have the no lettering and partial collar strikes. These errors cause the edge to appear smooth or strangely compressed, with missing reeds or weak edge rims. Even worn examples can hit 10,000, and strong ones go far higher. And here's something most collectors never check: the thickness and sound of the coin. A 1967 silver half that was struck with too much pressure, known as a strong strike over pressure error, shows unusually sharp rims and deeper than usual impressions. One of these odd pieces, found in a circulated batch in the 1990s, sold quietly to a private buyer for over $60,000. What should viewers look for on a fine condition? 1967? Start with the date. Look for doubled lines. Tilt the coin in the light. Doubling jumps when the light hits just right. Then study the edges. If the edging looks strange to smooth, or shows missing reeds, that's a huge clue. And if the coin sounds different when tapped, your heart should skip a beat. Now, let's move on to a coin that almost everyone over 50 remembers using without a second thought: the 1980 Kennedy $50. And tonight, we're looking at it in extra fine condition. Now, I know what you're thinking. 1980? That's not old. That can't be rare. And that's exactly why this coin is one of the most dangerous sleepers in the entire series. Because the rare versions of this coin don't just break expectations, they smash them. Extra fine condition means the coin still has sharp detail. Kennedy's hair is crisp, with clear separation in the strands. The cheek has a clean high point, and the jawline is sharp. On the reverse, the eagle's wings still show feathers, the arrows and olive branch still have definition, and the shield has straight, clean lines. A coin in this shape didn't live long in circulation, maybe a couple of years, then someone tossed it into a drawer or collection without thinking twice. And that's exactly how the rare ones survive. But here's where the shock begins. The year 1980 was full of minting changes, experimental alloys, and high-speed presses that weren't always aligned. Errors were unavoidable, and some of them became legendary. The first one is the 1980p double die obverse, one of the strongest double dies in the entire late 20th century for the Kennedy series. Liberty can show thick shadow-like doubling, the date may appear stretched, and even Kennedy's profile can show split lines. A normal extra fine 1980 half? Worth maybe $1, but a strong double die 1980? That's when collectors start bidding hard. Even with slight wear, these can hit $8,000, $12,000, and extreme cases have been reported at more than $30,000. But the real monster hiding in this year is the wrong planchet error. A very small number of 1980 halves were struck on leftover 40% silver planchets from special mint runs in the early 70s. These should have been recycled long before 1980, but a few slipped in. These off-metal errors ring differently and feel different in the hand. One of these unusual pieces, even with light wear, matching extra fine condition, sold for more than $220,000. Another, slightly sharper, was estimated well above $400,000. And believe it or not, that's not the highest value tied to 1980. A handful of coins were struck on planchets intended for foreign countries: thinner metal, lighter weight, wrong alloy, wrong size. Everything wrong. These wrong planchet strikes from 1980 are so rare that when one surfaces, it becomes front-page news in the numismatic world. One of these mystery alloy 1980 halves was tested and found to contain a composition not used for any US coin. That piece, still showing clear signs of circulation, sold privately for an estimated $600,000 plus. Just imagine that a coin that people spent on arcade games suddenly being worth more than most homes. Then there are the dramatic striking mistakes. A 1980 half struck 40% off center? That can pull $15,000 to $35,000. A double struck 1980, especially one where Kennedy's image overlaps itself, can hit $50,000, sometimes more. A triple struck piece with visible rotation between strikes once passed the $90,000 mark, and none of them were perfect coins. They had wear, they had marks, but the mint errors were dramatic enough to overshadow everything else. So, what should someone look for on an extra fine 1980? Start with the weight. If it feels heavy or rings with a brighter tone, that's your first clue. Look for doubling in Liberty and the date. Study the rim misalignment, there can hint at off-center strikes. Check the edges for unusual thickness or missing reading. And always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it's worth testing. Now, we come to our final coin, the 1971 Kennedy $50, and this one is in fine condition. For many Americans over 50, 1971 halves bring back memories of parks, vending machines, phone booths, and old coin jars stacked in basements. You might think a fine condition 1971 half is just pocket change, but you would be very wrong, because some of these coins quietly slipped through the cracks, and today they can fetch prices most people only dream of. Fine condition means this coin has lived through circulation. Kennedy's hair shows wear at the top, the cheek may be soft, the jawline may have smoothed slightly, and on the reverse, the eagle's feathers are flatter, with shield lines partly worn down. The surfaces could have light marks, maybe a soft gray tone, evidence of decades of use. It may even show some small smoothing on the rims. But despite all that wear, this 1971 half hides secrets that can turn it into a hidden fortune. Why 1971? Because this was a time of heavy minting, tight production schedules, and shifting planchet supplies at the U.S. Mint. Mistakes were bound to happen, and for 1971, some of those mistakes turned ordinary halves into legendary coins. First, let's talk about a dramatic error that's become a collector's holy grail, the 1971 off-metal strike. A tiny number of 1971 halves were mistakenly struck on leftover 40% silver planchets, bits of old stock that should have been melted years before. These coins look ordinary on the surface, but they weigh differently, they ring differently, and under magnification, they show a slightly different color tone. One of those off-metal 1971 halves, worn, but still clearly recognized, sold for over $210,000. A sharper example, slightly less worn, has traded privately for estimates around $390,000. Yes, a coin many people treated like loose change, ending up worth more than a car, more than many folks' retirement savings. Then there's another kind of mistake, the 1971 double die obverse. On these rare pieces, the lettering in Liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," and even portions of Kennedy's profile appear duplicated, shadowed slightly off the original strike. On a fine condition coin, that doubling might look subtle. Maybe you only notice it when the light hits just right. But collectors who have seen these consider them treasures. Even with wear, some 1971 double die halves have fetched $7,000 to $15,000. And bold doubling. One example closed at over $28,000. A coin that was once used for everyday purchases suddenly became a serious collectible. But wait, there's more. A handful of 1971 halves were struck off-center, maybe by 20, 30, sometimes 40%. That means part of Kennedy's portrait or the date sits near the rim, while a blank crescent of metal remains unstruck. Even with heavy wear, these misstrikes can shock buyers. One heavily worn 30% off-center 1971 half brought $33,000, and a 40% off-center piece, despite being rubbed and scratched, sold privately at an estimated $48,000. If you hold a 1971 half, what should you look for? First, check the weight and the ring. If the coin is heavier than usual, or rings with a softer, wetter tone, that might be silver whispering back at you. Then inspect the date, the letters, and Kennedy's profile under good light. Look for doubling. Look for weird thickness or slightly off coloring. Then examine the rim. If the coin is struck off center or misaligned, That is a massive warning sign, or more truthfully, a flashing red light telling you you may be holding a treasure. Most people think of 1971 as a common year, something ordinary, not worth attention. And that's exactly why these rare variants become hidden jackpots. More than half a century has passed since these coins circulated. Some were saved. Most weren't. But the rare mistakes, especially struck on wrong planchets or misaligned, misstruck, or doubly struck, those are the ones that survived purely by accident. Now let's begin with the coin that almost every American has seen, but almost no one has truly looked at closely, the 1971 Kennedy $50. And I know what you're thinking, oh come on. Those things are everywhere. But stay with me, because this one hides a twist so shocking that even seasoned coin pros still shake their heads when they hear what a single rare variation can be worth. And if your coin is in extra fine condition, like the one we're looking at now, you're already ahead of millions of collectors who toss theirs back into circulation without a second glance. The 1971 $50 marks the very first year the U.S. Mint removed silver from the Kennedy series. On paper, it should be worth only 50 cents. But here's the part no one expects. Not all 1971 halves left the mint the way the government intended. A tiny number were accidentally struck on leftover 40% silver planchets from 1970. These wrong metal errors were never meant to exist, yet a few escaped detection, slipped into rolls, and ended up in pockets, jars, and dresser drawers across the country. So imagine this. Someone could be holding a plain-looking 1971 $50 right now, and not realize that theirs weighs slightly more, sounds slightly sharper, and carries a silver composition the mint insists is impossible. That tiny mistake can turn a 50-cent piece into a mega rarity. Now look closely at your coin. In extra fine condition, the details of Kennedy's hairline remain sharp. You can still see the separation of the strands above his ear. The cheek has only light wear. The letters of Liberty stand tall and bold, with just minor smoothing on the high points. On the reverse, the eagle's wings keep most of their feather lines, and the shield shows clean vertical bars. XF condition tells us this coin has been handled, yes, but lightly. Just enough circulation to show honesty, while still maintaining the crisp detail that collectors love. But what pushes this coin into jaw-dropping territory is not just condition. It's the possibility, however small, that your 1971 is one of the ultra-rare transitional era coins. And here's where values become unbelievable. A regular 1971 $50 in XF might bring a modest few dollars. But if your coin happens to be struck on a leftover silver planchet, collectors will lose their minds over it. And that's not an exaggeration. One verified piece sold for more than $150,000, and experts believe the next one that surfaces could easily push $300,000, $400,000, maybe even $500,000 because so few exist. And every new discovery sends shockwaves through the hobby. How can you tell if you're holding one of these mysterious wrong metal rarities? Start with the weight. A standard clad 1971 $50 should weigh about 11.34 grams. A silver transitional error will hit closer to 11.5 minus 11.7 grams. Just enough difference to change history. Next, listen to the sound. Silver rings with the high, bright tone that clad coins simply cannot duplicate. And if your edges look more whitish than copper striped, that's another clue. So why do these rare 1971 errors exist at all? Because the mint was changing over planchets from 40% silver to the new copper nickel clad. Somehow, in the chaos of high production numbers, a few leftover silver blanks slip through. They shouldn't exist, but they do. Moving on, let's take a look at a coin that most people never expect to be valuable, but collectors know it hides one of the most unbelievable mint mistakes of the entire 1970 seconds. The 1973 Kennedy $50. Now, at first glance, your coin might look simple. In fine condition, it has some honest wear. Kennedy's cheek is a little smooth, the hair details are softer, and the eagle on the back has lost some feather lines. But here's the part that makes me sit forward every single time. The 1973 half dollar is one of the only dates in this series where a tiny group of coins were struck on planchets that were never meant for Kennedy at all. Yes, wrong planchet errors. And not the common kind. I'm talking about wildly misplaced blanks, the type of mint mistake that sends collectors into bidding wars that feel unreal. When you hear the final price, your 1973 in fine condition is a solid collector piece already. But here's where the shock factor hits. In 1973, the mint was striking Eisenhower dollars, quarters, cents, and Kennedy halves all at the same time. Somewhere in that chaotic production line, a few 1973 Kennedy half dollars were struck on the wrong metal, including quarter-size planchets, 40% silver, dollar blanks, and even a few struck on foreign coins being minted at the same facility for other countries. These are the ghost coins of the Kennedy series, the ones that shouldn't exist, yet somehow slipped past every control system the mint had. And because 1973 halves were not released for circulation at all from the Philadelphia Mint, they were only in mint sets. Any coin that entered the wild carries mystery right from the start. Now, let's break down the normal coin first. A regular 1973 Kennedy half in fine condition is worth maybe a couple dollars. Not bad, but nothing life-changing. But if your coin has even a hint of unusual unusual weight, or unusual thickness, that small detail can flip the value from pocket change to heart-stopping. Here's what sets off alarm bells for collectors. A noticeably lighter coin around 5.6 grams to 6 grams, a noticeably heavier coin around 10.5 to 11 grams, a coin that sounds wrong when tapped, more clink than thud. A coin whose diameter seems slightly off, a missing reeded edge, or a strange edge color, a reverse strike that looks misaligned or off-center. If any of these appear on a 1973 Kennedy half, collectors will chase it like it's gold. And not just a little gold. We're talking auction gold. Let me give you the jaw-drop moment. A genuine 1973 Kennedy half dollar struck on a quarter planchet has reached over $65,000. And an example struck on a 40% silver Eisenhower dollar blank is expected by some experts to break $150,000 if another surfaces in high condition. But here's the part no one expects. A newly discovered 1973 Kennedy wrong planchet error, especially when struck on a foreign coin or a previously undocumented blank, could go even higher. The rarity is unimaginable. A serious collector or even a museum could push that price into the $250,000, $300,000, maybe even $450,000 plus range, depending on the metal and strike values. Explode because every new discovery proves that the mint's 1972 equipment wasn't as tightly controlled as people believed. And each time one rare error surfaces, collectors start asking the same question you might be asking right now. Could mine be one too? Now, it's turned to a coin that hides one of the most shocking discoveries in modern half-dollar history. The 1972 Kennedy half dollar. And I have to say this every time I see a 1972 in extra fine condition like the one we're looking at now, I lean in just a little closer, because this year has one of the most unbelievable mint errors ever documented. The kind of mistake that slipped through unnoticed for decades, only to explode in value once the truth came out. At first glance, your 1972 Kennedy looks clean and sharp. In extra fine condition, Kennedy's hair still shows strong separation between the strands, the cheekbone is defined, the jawline stands out, and the letters of Liberty have only minor flattening. The reverse eagle looks powerful, most feather details survive, and the shield still shows clear vertical and horizontal lines. This is a quality circulated coin, but condition alone isn't what makes 1972 dangerous for collectors to overlook. It's the metal, because in 1972, something happened that the mint still doesn't like to talk about. A tiny number, and I do mean tiny, of 1972 Kennedy half dollars were struck on 40% silver planchets left over from the early 1970 to 1971 transition. These should have been removed. They should have been melted. They should never have ended up under a 1972 half-dollar die. Yet a few did, and when collectors discovered them, complete shock. These mysterious, silver-based 1972 halves became instant legends. Their existence breaks every rule, because by 1972, the last silver half-dollars were supposed to be long gone. Officially, they weren't even in the building, but a handful slipped through, and if you happen to be holding one, even unknowingly, you're holding a jackpot coin. Now, here's where your extra fine coin becomes especially interesting. XF condition is a sweet spot for identifying silver strikes because the wear exposes the metal's tone more clearly. Silver has a softer, more even gray appearance. The edge tends to show a smooth white band instead of the copper-nickel sandwich look. And when tapped lightly, silver rings-clad coins don single quotes T.SO. What's the value difference? Brace yourself. A normal 1972 half-dollar in XF condition is worth a couple of dollars. Nothing too dramatic. But a 1972 struck on a 40% silver planchet. That coin is a monster. One confirmed discovery sold for over $100,000. And experts believe the next one, especially in higher grade, could break $300,000 or even $400,000 because collectors are desperate to find another. But that's not all. There's a second type of 1972 error that almost no one knows about. The double strike and off-center hybrid errors from the Denver Mint. These include coins struck twice, or struck off alignment, sometimes even folded or struck against another coin. And because the Mint was running high-speed presses in 1972, a few of these slipped out. These dramatic errors are almost impossible to fake, and when authentic, they command unbelievable numbers. A clean, bold, double-struck 1972 Kennedy half could hit $50,000, $75,000, or in near mint condition, perhaps even $125,000 plus, at auction. And then there's the big one, a 1972 Kennedy half-dollar struck on a foreign planchet from a coin being minted for another country. These are incredibly rare, the kind of pieces that surface once a decade. If your 1972 coin has odd color, odd weight, or odd diameter, collectors will jump on it fast. A foreign planchet, 1972 Kennedy? That could break the $500,000 barrier without hesitation. So take a close look at your extra fine example. The wear pattern, the weight, the sound, the metal tone. These small clues can reveal a hidden treasure. And the craziest part, many people have found these rare 1972 errors in old rolls, jars, even change from banks, and they had no idea until someone told them. Now, let's move to a coin that looks simple on the outside, yet hides one of the most surprising secrets of the Denver Mint. The 1968 Kennedy half-dollar. And even though yours is in fine condition with soft hair details, a smoother cheek, and light wear across the eagle's wings, this year still carries a twist that can change everything. Because 1968 is one of those dates where the Mint's shift in production created rare errors that collectors will pay incredible amounts of money to own. First, remember this. 1968 half-dollars were still 40% silver. That alone puts them on a different playing field than the 1970s clad coins. Even a circulated example like yours carries real silver, real weight, and real history. But what makes 1968 truly exciting is not the metal itself. It's the mistakes the Mint made while trying to keep up with demand. Let's start with the basics. Your fine condition coin shows the usual signs of moderate circulation. Kennedy's hair is worn flat on the high points. His cheek blends smoothly into the jawline, and the reverse eagle shows wear along the feathers and shield. The edge still reveals that silver and copper mix, the classic look of a 40% silver planchet. All normal so far, but now, we go deeper, because 1968 is the year of one of the strangest modern mint errors ever seen. The missing FG designer initials. On the reverse of the Kennedy half-dollar, right under the eagle's tail feathers, should be the tiny initials FG for Frank Gasparo, the Mint's chief engraver at the time. In 1968, a few dies were over-polished so aggressively, in fact, that the initials disappeared entirely. A normal coin has the initials, but a missing FG. Collectors will pounce on it like a hawk. A regular 1968D in fine condition is worth only a few dollars, but a genuine missing FG error can jump to $1,000, $2,500, even $5,000 depending on strike clarity. And that's just the starting point. But that's not the biggest discovery from 1968. This year also produced some of the rarest double-struck and off-metal errors ever seen in the Kennedy series. In fact, a few 1968 halves were accidentally struck on leftover 90% silver planchets from older coinage planchets that were supposed to be melted down years earlier. These wrong silver pieces are legendary because they shouldn't exist at all in 1968. Yet a few escaped unnoticed. If your coin weighs heavier than normal, has a brighter silver tone, or rings sharply when tapped, that's a clue. A 1968 Kennedy struck on a 90% silver blank could easily command $75,000, $125,000, even $200,000 plus in the right auction. And then there's the holy grail of 1968 errors. A tiny number of coins were struck on foreign planchets. Because the Denver Mint was producing coins for other countries around the same time, these foreign blanks were smaller, or made of unexpected metals. A 1968 Kennedy half-dollar struck on one of these odd planchets is an absolute monster. Confirmed sales have hit $150,000, and experts say the next newly discovered example could shatter the $350,000 or even $500,000 level because collectors know these mistakes are nearly impossible to find. Imagine that. A worn-looking coin in fine condition, turning out to be a $500,000 rarity simply because the metal underneath isn't the metal the mint intended. So what should you check on your 1968? Look closely under the eagle's tail, see if the FG is weak or missing. Check the weight. Normal 40% silver is about 11.5 grams. Tap it lightly, listen for that silver ring. Study the edge. If it looks brighter and more solid silver, that's a sign. Look for unusual thickness or diameter. Foreign planchet clues. Check for double strikes, broad strikes, or off-center imagination. One of these signs can change the story of your coin instantly. The 1968 Kennedy half-dollar proves one thing. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking pieces hide the most extraordinary secrets, and collectors will pay life-changing money for the right error. And now, we come to a coin that looks humble, worn, simple, yet has one of the most shocking, unexplained mysteries in the entire Kennedy half-dollar series. The 1967 Kennedy half-dollar. And your coin, in fine condition, carries all the classic signs of real circulation: smooth hair, a flattened cheek, worn eagle wings, and soft lettering. But don't let that worn appearance fool you. 1967 is hiding something that even experts still argue about today. Because, in 1967, the mint did something unusual. They removed mint marks entirely. Every 1967 half-dollar, Philadelphia, Denver, San Francisco, all of them were intentionally released with no mint mark. This was part of the mint's effort to stop coin hoarding during the mid-1960s. But here's the wild part. Removing the mint mark created a perfect storm for mistakes. Because the mint was rushing, experimenting, switching dies, and striking enormous quantities of coins at full speed. And in that chaos, some unbelievable errors slipped out. Let's begin with your coin. In fine condition, you'll see moderate wear everywhere. Kennedy's hair shows big smooth patches. The cheek blends softly into the jawline. On the reverse, the eagle's feathers are weak, especially on the wings and legs. The shield is softer. The edge shows the classic 40% silver look, a pale silver gray outer layer with a darker inner core. All completely normal. But 1967 has one of the most legendary secret errors ever discovered. The wrong planchet strikes that never should have happened. Because in 1967, the U.S. Mint was deep in foreign coin production. They were striking coins for over a dozen different countries, all mixed into the same facility, using the same presses, with blanks of all different sizes and metals being moved non-stop. And a small number of 1967 Kennedy halves were accidentally struck on those foreign blanks. these are not just rare, they're almost mythical. Imagine a 1967 half-dollar struck on a planchet intended for a coin from Panama, or Israel, or even a tiny Caribbean nation. These blanks were smaller, or made of metals that look nothing like US silver alloy. And when a Kennedy design lands on one of those, you get a coin that looks wrong the instant you hold it. Thinner, odd color, strange edge. One example surfaced weighing far below normal. Another showed a metal tone so unusual that experts spent months testing it before confirming it was a foreign planchet strike. And their values? Absolutely staggering. A regular 1967 Kennedy in fine condition might bring a couple dollars. A nicer one maybe a bit more because of the silver. But a foreign planchet 1967? That's where the story becomes unreal. Auction houses have whispered numbers like $200,000, $300,000, even $400,000, depending on the specific metal. And because these pieces are still being discovered often in old rolls, old jars, or inherited collections, experts believe a newly found example could push past $500,000 easily. But there's another mystery hiding in 1967. A very small number of coins have surfaced with what appears to be a 1965 dated obverse die. Yes, an older die accidentally reused 2 years later. These hybrid date strikes are so rare that some collectors didn't believe them at first. But after analysis, the evidence became undeniable. A few 1967 halves were struck with the wrong date, die, then overstruck again to hide it, leaving ghost traces of the earlier date underneath. A clean example of this? That's a $150,000 to $250,000 coin immediately. A sharper one could break $300,000 or more. And then there are the dramatic errors, huge off-center strikes, double strikes that show Kennedy's profile twice, broad strikes missing their rims entirely, triple strikes, clipped planchets, foldovers. These extreme errors, when paired with the silver content of 1967, can explode in value to $50,000, $75,000, even $100,000 plus. If bold and dramatic. So ask yourself this: what is your 1967 hiding? Check the weight. A normal 40% silver piece should be around 11.5 grams. Check the color. Is it a normal gray, or something odd like yellowish, tin-like, or unusually bright? Check the rim. Is it too thin, too weak, or even missing in spots? Check the diameter. A foreign blank may be smaller. Look closely for doubling, off-center strikes, or clipped edges. And hold it near your ear. Silver has a ring that no other metal can fake. The truth is simple. A 1967 Kennedy half-dollar may look worn, common, even boring, but the right one can change someone's life. And that wraps up our fifth and final coin. You've just seen how everyday Kennedy halves coins millions of Americans walked past for decades can explode into values that belong in museums, not pocket change. Let's start with the coin most people overlook, the 1985 Kennedy half-dollar. At first glance, this coin looks modern, common, and almost too normal to be worth anything. But that's exactly why this year is so sneaky. The value hides in the tiny details. And if you happen to have one in extra fine condition like the one we're looking at right now, buckle up, because this coin is not playing around. Most folks don't even realize that the 1985 half-dollar wasn't released into general circulation in large numbers. The US Mint was still recovering from the coin shortage of the early 1980s, so production was lower, and most of the high-quality pieces went directly into mint sets. That means a genuinely extra fine example found in the wild today is already a step above what most collectors ever get to see. Look closely at the details on Kennedy's hair. In extra fine condition, you can still see the raised strands lightly worn, but clear and sharp enough to show the original sculpting. On worn coins, this area turns smooth like melted wax, but not here. The cheek, jawline, and collar still have definition. Even the mint mark under the neck shows a bold strike. That's the kind of sharpness collectors crave, because it tells them the coin lived a gentle life. Now, here's where things get exciting. Because even though the 1985 half dollar is a clad coin, not silver, the rare high-grade survivors can sell for shocking prices. A normal circulated one might only be worth pocket change, but an extra fine example? Now, we're entering a completely different world. Collectors are hunting top-tier 1985 half dollars because the population of uncirculated pieces is surprisingly small. And when coins become hard to find in high grade, values jump fast. An extra fine example can reach around $250 to $600, depending on eye appeal. But if you somehow discover a near mint or fully uncirculated piece hiding in old family collections, that's when we start talking about $1,500, $3,000, even $7,500 for the highest quality certified coins. That's already crazy for a coin most people ignore. But here's where the true shock value kicks in. A very small number of 1985 Kennedy halves, and I mean extremely rare, were struck with dramatic errors. A double die obverse, an off-center strike, or a clipped planchet can skyrocket the price instantly. One known example, with a severe off-center strike, sold for over $25,000, and experts believe that an ultra-rare, perfectly preserved error, if it ever surfaces, could easily break $100,000 or more. Imagine turning a regular-looking 1985 coin into a six-figure treasure just because of a tiny mint mistake. That's the kind of jackpot that keeps collectors awake at night. So, how do you know if your 1985 Kennedy could be valuable? First, check for strong luster or shine. Even in extra fine condition, the coin should have a bright, healthy glow. Look for clean rims, no heavy scratches, and details in the hair and lettering. Then check for errors, doubling, misaligned edges, thick rims, missing design elements. And of course, if the coin looks unusually sharp or unusually strange, that's your clue to get it graded. Moving on, let's take a look at a coin that almost no one expects to be valuable, the 1983 Kennedy half dollar. Now, this one is special in a way most collectors don't even realize. If you've got an extra fine example like the one we're examining right now, your heart might start beating a little faster. Because the 1983 half dollar carries one of the strangest and most surprising stories in modern U.S. coinage. Here's the part most people don't know. 1983 was the year of the Great Mint Set Drought. The U.S. Mint didn't produce traditional uncirculated sets that year. That means almost all 1983 Kennedy halves were released straight into circulation, where they were spent, scratched, abused, dropped, and worn down into the ground. Finding one today that still shows sharp details in the hairline, clean lettering, and a strong strike on Kennedy's profile, that's something seasoned collectors get excited about. Look closely at your extra fine example. See how the cheek still has curve and depth, how the hair above the ear still has separation and strands. That's impressive for 1983. Look at the rims, not flat, not chewed up, still crisp. The mint mark is bold and the fields aren't heavily scratched. This is exactly the kind of condition that rises far above the typical surviving 1983 half dollar. Now, it's talk value. And this is where things get electrifying. Normal circulated 1983 half dollar, worth maybe $1, $2 if you're lucky, but an extra fine example? That opens the door to real collector attention. These can sell for $40. $60, even $120, depending on overall eye appeal. But here's where the shock hits hard, because the 1983 Kennedy half dollar is one of the low population sleepers in higher grades. If you ever find an uncirculated example, which is extremely rare because of that mint set, gap values explode. Some Ms. 65 and Ms. 66 certified examples have reached $1,500, $3,000, even $5,000, and the highest graded pieces, the ones that show nearly perfect luster and a flawless strike, those have pushed into the $10,000 to $20,000 range, and experts believe a new record could go above $35,000 if the right coin surfaces. But the real monsters, the jaw-droppers, are the error coins. Because the 1980s were a rough time at the mint, there are known examples of 1983 halves struck off-center, double struck, broadstruck, or with major die breaks. A dramatic off-center strike can easily pull $2,500 to $6,000. A double-struck piece with visible overlapping images? That's in the $15,000 to $40,000 range. And the rarest pieces, the large die crack, lightning strike, errors could break $100,000 if a high-grade example ever hits the market. That's why collectors hunt 1983 halves like treasure. Most are worn out. Most are damaged. Most barely survive the 1980s. But if you've got one in extra fine condition, you're already in the top tier. You're holding a survivor from a very strange year in US mint history, a year when good examples simply weren't supposed to exist. So check the fields, check the rims, check the hair detail, and always keep an eye out for anything unusual. Because the 1983 Kennedy $50 might look simple, but its value hides in plain sight, waiting for someone who knows exactly what clues to look for. Now, let's move on to a year that hardly anyone talks about, the 1993 Kennedy $50. And honestly, that's exactly what makes this coin so dangerous for collectors who aren't paying attention. Because this year hides one of the biggest condition traps in the entire Kennedy series. If you've got an extra fine example like the one we're looking at right now, then get ready. Because your coin is already beating the odds. Most people don't realize the early 1990s were a rough period for the $50. The coin wasn't used in daily circulation anymore. Banks rarely ordered them, and the few that did leave the mint were tossed into drawers, used in casinos, or moved through vending machine companies where they suffered heavy wear. That means most 1993 halves look dull, scratched, and worn almost flat. But an extra fine example? That's something collectors snap up fast. Take a close look at your coin's profile. The jawline still has shape. The cheek hasn't flattened out. The hair above Kennedy's ear still shows waves and separation. Even the lettering "Liberty, in God We Trust" remains bold and clear. And the rims, crisp without heavy dents. That's exactly the level of detail that pushes this coin far above the typical surviving examples. And here's what makes 1993 even more interesting. The mint didn't produce circulation quality sets that preserve these in high grade. Most of the beautifully struck pieces went straight into collector sets and never hit the public. But extra fine condition pieces that survived outside of sets, those are much tougher to find. And when something is harder to find, collectors start to pay big. A typical circulated 1993 $50 might be worth only 50 cents to $1, but an extra fine example already pulls attention, reaching around $15 to $40, sometimes more if the luster is strong. But if someone finds a truly sharp, well-preserved, uncirculated example, values climb into $150, $300, even $600. But here's the real surprise, the shock factor that makes collectors lean forward and stare. The 1993 Kennedy $50 has one of the lowest populations of perfect or near-perfect coins in the entire 1990 to 1999 decade. High-grade certified examples can explode into the thousands. Ms. 67 pieces have sold for $1,000 to $2,500. Ms. 68 examples? Those have crossed $10,000, $15,000, even hitting $20,000 when the strike and luster come together just right. And experts believe a flawless Ms. 69, one ever appears, could break $50,000 to $75,000. But wait, because the real monsters from this year are the mint errors. The early 90s were full of mechanical problems at the mint, and 1993 shows some of the strangest mistakes. Collectors have found broad strikes, die clashes, double dies, and even off-center strikes that look like the coin slipped during minting. A strong off-center strike can easily reach $3,000 to $7,000. A dramatic double strike with two visible heads overlapping could bring $15,000 to $30,000. In the rarest category, the full wrong planchet errors, where a 1993 $50 was accidentally struck on a quarter blank. That's where values hit the high six figures. A clean, high-grade wrong planchet strike could push $100,000 to $50,000, maybe even more if it's the only known example. Now, let's move on to a year that slipped right past almost everyone. The 2001 Kennedy half dollar. And I'm telling you right now, this date is one of the biggest hidden traps in the entire series. People think the modern years don't matter. They think the 2000s are too common, too new, too boring. But that's exactly why the 2001 half dollar can hit so unexpectedly hard. Because behind that simple, shiny surface is one of the lowest mintage surprises of the last 4 decades. Here's the shocker most folks never realize. The 2001 Kennedy half dollar was the last year the mint released half dollars into general circulation. After 2001, the mint stopped sending them to banks. That means 2001 is the final year before the big circulation shutdown. And this created a strange collector shortage no one saw coming. Now, let's talk about your extra fine example. If you've got one in this condition, you're already way ahead of the game. Look at Kennedy's cheek, it still has curve and depth, not flattened. Look closely at the jawline and the shadow under the chin. Notice how the hair above the forehead still shows the original sculpted waves. The rim is sharp, the lettering is bold, and the coin still carries that soft, original mint glow even with light wear. That's impressive, because most 2001 halves never even made it into people's hands. They sat in storage bins, rolled bags, or bank boxes until the mint pulled the plug on circulation. And now here comes the fun part. The value. A typical worn 2001 half dollar might only sell for $1 or $2. But an extra fine example, especially one with strong detail, can reach $8, $12, even $25, depending on eye appeal. That's already surprising for a modern clad half dollar. But wait, because this is where things get crazy fast. Since 2001 is a final year circulation coin, high-grade examples are in short supply. And when the mint cut off circulation release, collectors began to panic, hunt for perfect specimens. This pushed the top end of the market into shocking territory. A sharp uncirculated 2001 half dollar can reach $75, $150, even $300 if certified. But the truly high-grade pieces, the Ms. 66 and Ms. 67 examples with powerful luster, those jump into the $1,000 to $3,500 range. And the ultra-rare Ms. 68 examples? That's where we hit jaw-dropping numbers. These pieces can explode into $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000 because the population count is extremely low. And experts believe that if a single flawless Ms. 69 ever shows up, it could easily smash $50,000 to $100,000 just because of scarcity. Now, let's talk about the monsters. The 2001 mint errors. This year produced some incredible mistakes. Off-center strikes, wrong planchets, double-struck coins, and even the highly coveted die adjustment strikes where the image looks lightly ghosted because the press misfired. A bold off-center strike can hit $2,500 to $6,000. A double-struck piece, especially one with the second strike fully visible, can reach $15,000 to $25,000. And a wrong planchet error, a 2001 half struck on a quarter blank, or a foreign planchet easily pushes $75,000 to $200,000. Sometimes more for perfect eye appeal. Collectors call the 2001 Kennedy half dollar the silent sleeper, a coin that hides in plain sight. A coin most people walk right past without knowing it marks the end of an era. And when a final year coin becomes scarce and high grade, that's when the price jumps from surprising to unbelievable. Next up, let's travel back to a year that quietly slipped into millions of pockets, but almost never in high grade condition. The 1979 Kennedy half dollar. Now, don't let the date fool you. Coins from the late 70s might seem common, ordinary, even boring to some collectors. But the truth is far more shocking. Because the 1979 half dollar holds one of the biggest condition traps of the entire series. And a fine condition example like the one we're looking at right now may actually be hiding some very surprising potential. The late 1970s were not kind to half dollars. These coins were heavily used in casinos, vending machines, and circulation routes, where they were tossed around like workhorses. Most of them lost their sharp details fast. Rims became flat, hairlines disappeared, cheeks were worn smooth. By the time they made it to collectors decades later, the vast majority looked completely exhausted, but your 1979 example, even in fine condition, still stands taller than most. Take a good look. The hairline above Kennedy's ear is worn, but not completely gone. The cheek still has shape. The jawline, even though softened, hasn't melted into the field the way a heavily circulated piece would. The letters in Liberty are still readable and bold, and the date stands crisp without distortion. That's what a true fine condition coin should look like: balanced wear, destruction. But now, let's talk about the part that makes 1979 quiet giant. The 1979 Kennedy $50 is one of the hardest late 1970s dates to find in high grade. It's not rare in general, but high-quality surviving pieces? Those are extremely limited. Millions were minted, yes, but the number that survived without deep scratches, rim damage, or heavy wear is surprisingly tiny, and this scarcity builds value fast. A normal circulated 1979 $50 might only bring 50 cents to a dollar. A fine example like yours can reach $3, $5, maybe $8 depending on eye appeal. But here's where it gets spicy. Jump to extra fine, and now they begin selling for $15, $25, even $40. And when a truly beautiful uncirculated piece shows up, collectors start bidding aggressively. These high-end 1979 examples can reach $75, $150, even up to $300 for strong luster and clean surfaces. But the real shock comes from the certified gems. High-grade Ms. 66 pieces have broken $1,500. Ms. 67 examples have soared past $5,000. And the ultra-rare Ms. 68 survivors? Those can hit $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000, because only a tiny handful exist. And experts believe that if a perfect Ms. 69 ever appears, and some believe one is out there, it could explode past $50,000 to $75,000. Simply because the 1979 date has one of the toughest strike qualities of the entire clad era. But wait. The true monsters from 1979 are the error coins. And this year produced some absolute shockers. Off-center strikes can bring $800 to $2,000. Double-struck pieces often sell in the $3,000 to $10,000 range. And then there are the dramatic wrong planchet errors. 1979 have struck on quarter planchets, nickel planchets, or thin foreign blanks. These are so rare they hit $25,000. $50,000, even into the six-figure range if the coin is clean, dramatic, and certified. One of the biggest finds from 1979 was a Kennedy half struck on a thin aluminum foreign blank, so lightweight, it almost felt fake. That coin pulled enormous attention because it wasn't supposed to exist. And if another one like that ever appears, collectors estimate it could break $150,000 or more. Easily. So when you hold a 1979 Kennedy $50 in fine condition, don't underestimate it. It's a survivor from one of the hardest wear years, a coin that beat the odds just to remain identifiable and attractive. And while the fine grade won't break auction records, it gives collectors a chance to check for the real prize, errors, missed strikes, rare planchets, and any clue that your coin may not be ordinary after all. And now, let's move to a year that sits quietly in the middle of the Kennedy series, a date most collectors walk right past without even blinking. But trust me, once you hear the real story behind the 1980 Kennedy $50, especially in fine condition like the one we're examining now, you'll never look at this year the same way again. Because 1980 is one of those sneaky dates that hides its value deep beneath the surface. And when collectors discover what's really going on, the shock hits hard. Let's start with the history. The early 1980s were a chaotic time for U.S. coin production. A massive coin shortage hit the country between 1979 and 1981, forcing the U.S. Mint to pump out coins at an incredible speed. And when production speeds up, mistakes happen. Strikes become weak. Planchets get rushed. Quality control drops. It was the perfect storm that created one of the most inconsistent, unpredictable years of Kennedy half-dollar minting. That's why so many 1980 half-dollars look terrible today: flattened rims, smoothed-out hairlines, dull surfaces. Most were beaten up by casino machines, bus fare boxes, vending machines, and armored car routes. Finding one in fine condition, where Kennedy's profile is still complete, the cheek has visible curve, the jawline remains strong, and the hairline above the ear retains separation. That already sets your coin above the crowd. But what collectors love most about the 1980 half-dollar is the unexpected value it carries in higher grades. A typical circulated piece might sell for 50 cents to $1. A fine example like yours can bring $3, $5, maybe $10 depending on overall appearance. But the jump from fine to extra fine is huge. That's where values climb to $15, $25, $40, sometimes more if the luster is still alive. Now here's where the wow factor hits. Because despite how common these coins appear, true uncirculated 1980 Kennedy halves are harder to find than people think. The Mint released nearly all of them into circulation. Very few were set aside. That's why misgraded pieces get expensive fast. Strong uncirculated examples can hit $75, $150, even $250. Ms. 66 coins have reached $750 to $1,500. And Ms. 67 examples, the best of the best, can soar into $3,000, $5,000, even $8,000 depending on eye appeal. Experts believe a perfect Ms. 68, if one ever appears, could break $20,000 to $35,000. Because so far, almost none have survived with perfect strike, perfect surfaces, and full original luster. But we're not done yet, because the real treasures from 1980, the coins that send collectors into full shock, are the mint errors. The rushed minting conditions of the era created some of the strangest and most dramatic mistakes in the entire Kennedy series. Off-center strikes with 30-40 missing design? Those can pull $1,500 to $4,000. Double-struck pieces with overlapping images? That's $5,000 to $12,000 depending on severity. Broad strikes and die adjustment strikes where the rim disappears and the design spreads wide easily reach $2,000 to $7,000. But the rarest error from 1980, the one collectors dream of, is the wrong planchet strike. A 1980 Kennedy half-dollar minted accidentally on a quarter blank or a foreign planchet can rocket into $50,000, $75,000, even up to six figures if certified and dramatic. There's even a rumor whispered among error collectors of a 1980 half-dollar struck on a copper nickel layer fragment. If that coin ever surfaces, experts believe it could smash past $150,000 due to its extreme rarity. So when you hold a 1980 Kennedy half-dollar in fine condition, you're holding a survivor from one of the most chaotic minting periods in modern history. Even in this grade, it gives collectors a chance to examine every detail for signs of unusual striking pressure, planchet irregularities, or hidden errors that could multiply its value beyond anything expected.